see. Looks like, okay, good. So we got that hooked up. All right. Welcome in, everyone. Let's see. All right. All right. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, looking to have conversations. I know it's been a week, had to get some stuff taken care of, but glad to be back. And yeah, just looking to have conversations with people on, arguments that they've heard, would like to discuss, or even just questions or concerns they have about the Catholic faith. Not looking necessarily to debate, as in I'm not going to be trying to convince you of my position, and so I'm not looking for people to try to convince me to leave Catholicism, but I am open to questions or... All right. I was hoping that I would have had the internet thing taken care of, but I guess not. But we'll see how it goes. Welcome, Pokogurumi, and hi, IQ. I think you are the first person to make a comment. Not the first person to join, but the first person to comment. But, yeah. I just had... Thank you for the heart me. But yeah, I got a new video on my YouTube channel. It's the same Catholic Thinker. I've also got a Discord. I can't get the link to work where you can just click it in my profile description, but you can either copy paste the link tree or just shoot me a DM and I'll be more than happy to get the link over to you. But yeah, I had a video on the Model contingency argument, which is different from the Model ontological argument. And I've actually got a couple... I just did a short clarifying a point, or actually bringing to light a new idea that I had in regards to that argument, and someone else pointed something else out. Doesn't really change the argument, just a common mistake a lot of people make in presenting that argument. Excuse me. But yeah, I currently don't have anyone in the request box, but if you're 18 or older and have a question regarding a particular argument for or against theism, or just have a question in general about Catholicism and would like help in understanding it, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. But I hope everyone had a good Monday so far. Oh, looks like we got our first guest. Welcome back.
Bueno. Oh, you recognize me?
Yes.
All right. I changed my screen name, so I was surprised. So I have a question.
It was the profile picture.
Oh yeah. All right. All right. So I've been working on like a scriptural argument. I don't think it's going to be very strong against Catholics because y'all don't do sola scriptura.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if I could run it by you roughly at the moment and then send you the full text later and get your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I don't like echo chambers, and like I at least respect your opinion compared to others. But first off, like my opening question would be like, just simply like, out of all the varieties of Christianity, like how do you determine which you find truthful?
As in, out of all of the different
Right,
Christian denominations, or out of the scriptures?
Yeah, because out of the denominations, because like I think the denominations, like the different beliefs and interpretations, follow under the denominations. I think it's encapsulated.
Okay, yeah. So this is going to be presuming like already just like the the Bible as divinely inspired. Jesus is the Son of God, died, raised from the dead. Like it's going to be presupposing all of that, because we're just at this point
Okay.
Determining.
We're assuming one of them's true.
Yeah, and so now at this point we're just determining
Okay.
which one is true, if any.
All right.
So in the scriptures, Jesus makes several promises. One of which is that the church, what at this point we're not talking about whether it's Peter uniquely or not, but he gives the keys of the kingdom in the Synoptic Gospels when he names him Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. He also says after that, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. So there is an authoritative...
All right, what does that mean?
So that's an authoritative office and power that the church has. It's basically, I don't know if you remember in Genesis when Joseph was sold into slavery and then rose to power and eventually became Pharaoh's right-hand man. And Pharaoh says, hey,
yeah, vaguely.
And Pharaoh basically says, hey, whatever Joseph says, treat it as if I said it. And that's basically what it means to, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you say is the case is to be treated as the same as if it came directly from God. So there's an authoritative power given to the apostles, specifically to the that office, that leadership. Then we also have Jesus saying, I will send you the Paraclete that will guide you to all truth. So that's also to that office. And then finally he also promises that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So notice though, he doesn't promise perfection of the people. He doesn't promise that they're always going to say the right things, but rather that whatever they say is binding, that the Paraclete's going to guide them to truth, and that the gates of hell will not prevail against this office. So in order for effectively the claims of Protestantism to be true, that would mean that, because we can see historically that office was given to, or believed and held by the office of bishops and by the Catholic Church. In order for Protestantism to be true, Jesus either need to have lied, because the gates of hell did prevail against the Catholic Church, because the keys of the kingdom, the power of binding and loosing, those are conversations about an office, about what, like the presidential office. They're not necessarily about the person holding the office. The person holding it has access to those powers, but those powers exist independently of the person. So either he lied about the gates of hell prevailing against those powers, he didn't foresee that the gates of hell would prevail against that office, thereby making him not omniscient, thereby not God. Or he is God and he is telling the truth, and he did foresee that the church would run into these problems, yet still promised that he would be there with them. And thereby the claims of Protestantism falls flat on its face, in my perspective, because of those promises of Christ.
So, I don't, and honestly, I don't know a whole lot about like Catholic beliefs generally. But basically, you're saying like, because I know like Catholics, so actually, hold on. So let me back up a little bit. You're just like a straight Catholic, right? Because I've recently come to the understanding, allegedly, that like Roman Catholics and just Catholics are different. Is that hold true in your view or not?
No. So Roman Catholic is the largest, what's called a rite. The biggest difference between the different rites of Catholicism is just the way the sacraments are celebrated. For example, you have the Byzantine Rite. Those are very close to our Orthodox brothers and sisters, but in the Byzantine Rite, as an example, they baptize, confirm, and give First Communion to infants. Whereas in the Latin Rite, or the Roman Rite, we do it like baptism can be done at infancy. First Communion is then done at the age of reason, usually around 7 years old or so. And then confirmation is done anywhere between 12 to 16 years old, depending on the particular bishop. But the belief surrounding our doctrines and dogmas is still the same. So literally the only difference between the rites is when the Latin Rite was first established, when the Roman Missal was first established, the Vatican basically said, hey, we also recognize that there are parishes and groups that are following a valid form of celebrating the Mass that have arisen from, an apostolic father and are continuing on that tradition. So we're not going to tell them that they can no longer practice the Eucharist in that manner, but for everyone else that can't lay claim to that, this is the structure that we are to follow, which is the Roman Rite. So the way that I like to the way to understand it is base Catholicism is whatever comes from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Base Catholicism is just the teachings. And then the rites are the different ways that one can practice those teachings.
I mean, it seems a bit odd coming from, like, I don't know. I guess it's maybe my own personal hang-up. Okay, so I mean, obviously that's how it's true from Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
You're just making? I guess you're. How do you understand that, like, Protestants and Orthodox see it?
So to understand like the difference between Protestants and Orthodoxy, an Orthodox isn't schism. Now, all a schism means that you do not accept the authority of the papal office. You can agree to everything about the Catholic belief and Catholic dogmas and not submit yourself to the authority of Rome. You are now in schism. So being in schism doesn't mean that you're teaching or saying anything bad. It just means that you don't accept the authority of the Pope, and especially in the case of the Orthodox, who can trace their bishops to apostolic succession, that their sacraments are valid. Versus a Protestant, they did more than just reject the authority of the Pope. They rejected some of the teachings as well. That's why you have things like, sola scriptura, faith alone, all of these different...
once saved, always saved, all these various traditions.
Yeah. So...
All right, so... pardon me for interrupting real quick.
No, you're good.
All right, so now... and mind you, like, I was raised as a Baptist, so I didn't know what sola scriptura was, but I was taught very much sola scriptura. If you have a question, then you go to the Bible.
Yeah.
Because the Bible would be the ultimate authority, allegedly. So, like, I'm having trouble, like, if I'm like, I guess, I have an inherently a different understanding of what I was taught God was in religion and Christianity, I suppose, from Catholicism. But, like, the idea, like, how do you guys wrestle with the idea of, if you have a question that only God could answer, how do you guys go about finding that answer?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on what the question itself ultimately is. But as far as, like, using the scriptures to help you come to an understanding and come to and answer that question, St. Augustine actually quite literally wrote the book on the way that Catholics approach the Bible, our biblical hermeneutics. And I do have a video that touches on it and uses like the creation account as a way to help explain that. If you want that, I can get over to you. But the approach, the main thing is that to know, the biggest thing with like sola scriptura versus like how the church actually approaches the Bible is mainly due to whether or not the Bible is inerrant. The way that I like to describe it is Protestants treat the Bible as if God dictated it. Whereas for Catholics, our belief is that the human authors were writing about salvation history. Not necessarily history in and of itself, not necessarily about science or anything else like that. It is about salvation history in and of salvation history. They were free to express that salvation history as they saw fit, whether it was to use metaphorical language, mythology type language, or even just straight history. And God protected them from error only insofar as salvation history. So, like for the creation account,
I'll let you finish. I'm sorry. Yeah. I had thoughts.
You're good. So as salvation or the creation account, what is required as a Catholic to believe, and from there we're then free to interpret the scripture to our best understanding, as long as it accepts these criteria, is that God created with intention. He created with order instead of chaos. And he created humanity in a special way. And we freely fell from that special status, and we now exist in that fallen state. So as long as your interpretation of the creation account accepts those criteria, you can hold to a literal 24-hour, 7-day creation account. You can hold to what St. Augustine held to, where everything was created in a single moment that was required, and then things could have, quote-unquote, evolved. Obviously, they didn't have the understanding of evolution at the time like we do, but he kind of had a proto-idea of evolution, so there wasn't days of creation. Or you can hold to, like Thomas Aquinas, where God is continuously emanating, and the days of creation are more to be understood as and what he calls angelic categories, where he created the angelic categories is time, space and matter, and then stuff filling up that space and matter. So those are the different ways that you can approach the text and still be in line with Catholicism.
So, all right. So see, my understanding is like I'm to understand that, like, I guess, like you said, I have a Protestant understanding. Like I was taught, I don't think it currently, but I was taught that the Bible is the inerrant word of God. Not that it was written by God, but as it says in it says in Timothy, all scripture is God breathed and proof for correction and righteousness, which leads me to think that which would, given that text, given that scripture, and the idea that if I'm to believe it, then I will believe what it says. Like it seems like it's very clearly stating that, like, regardless of what's written, it's correct because God made sure it was correct. And then like the thing you mentioned about, like, oh well, the writers could use whatever language they wanted, as long as it was aligned with what God's message was, is what you were getting at. Am I not mischaracterizing that?
Yeah, that's close enough for casual conversation.
All right.
But yeah, like
all right, so I won't hold you to it.
But yeah, like if the author wanted to convey like the problem of evil through a fictitious story, like the Book of Job, he was free to do so. If he wanted to describe the account of salvation history in a more literal historical account, like we hold, like say the Book of Acts, they were free to do so. Or convey a theological truth of salvation history in a pastoral letter, like the letters of Paul. Like that's why you have all these different genres.
Uh huh. Well, see, my contention with that is like as a person, like if I'm to believe that God created me and like God wrote this knowing that this would be the only communication He had with me, much less the entire human race, it seems weird that He would make me in such a way that like I understand that mythologies aren't real. But I'm supposed to think that this mythology, for all the same reasons the other ones aren't real, this one is real. That just that I don't I know this isn't like we're not having a theological. I
Yeah.
guess we are now, but like it just seems far fetched.
Yeah, so, and that gets into like the divine hiddenness problem, and that's actually the next video that I want to do. Hopefully, I'll be able to get that taken care of by this weekend. But yeah,
Uh
like
huh.
as far as like um, the distinction between like, okay, well, obviously these different creation accounts, aren't real. What makes this particular creation account true? And that's where I was getting into like, we're able to engage with it. So the author did use his cosmology and his understanding of the mythos. One thing that was pointed out to me that was interesting is in almost every single creation account that existed within the Mesopotamian Mediterranean area, creation came about without intention and through chaos, whereas with the Genesis account, it's through order and intention. So there's a subtle nuance there. Now I'm not saying that's enough to justify it being the case, but what it's meant to do is, all right, this is how to understand your relationship between you and your creator. Not necessarily that the events transpired in the mythological process as literally described, but just that, hey, as a human who wants to know my creator, how am I to understand my relationship with my creator? And that's what Genesis is about. So the thing to keep in mind is, especially if you're engaging with the Bible, is the Bible is not meant to convince a non-believer. Can it? Sure. I believe that God can work through many ways. In fact, St. Augustine had his conversion story because of him picking up the Bible here after hearing pick up and read, pick up and read. He picked up, and I forget what the passage was, but there was a random passage he fell to that helped him in that particular moment that led to his repentance and conversion. Uh,
I mean, certainly the Bible is what led me to become a believer in Christ, but
mhm.
like that was like decades ago.
Yeah, but as far as
Well,
like it being a good way to convince a non-believer, I disagree with just spouting scripture to convince someone. What it should be used for is justifying to a non-believer why I as a believer hold a particular belief, or to another fellow believer why I hold a particular belief. Not to convince them of the belief, but just why I hold it. And then two, once someone already has a belief, to help them form and guide them in that belief.
all right, I'm going to ask one last
Mm-hmm.
question, and then I'm going to end it for now. I'm going to let you move on to somebody else,
All right.
and then I'll send you my paperwork later, my working document later, and we can message about it if you when you have time.
Yeah.
So my last question is simply going to be like, well, as I mean, you're going to have a different take on this than I'm used to, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how do you manage contradictions when it comes to things that seem like a theology issue,
Mm-hmm.
where there seems to be contradictory passages?
So it's going to depend largely on what the particular contradiction is. I had someone who went something like, who came up here some time ago and tried to present the passage of Darius's daughter, where in one passage it said that she had died already before he went to get Jesus, and in another passage it said that, or it didn't include that aspect, and it was the way that Arius spoke sounded as if he expected her to still be alive at the time of him speaking with Jesus. And they claimed that was like a historical contradiction and a theological contradiction. So historical, as far as like historical contradictions go, um, my understanding is that's not necessarily a part that's protected by the salvation history aspect. So that could have just been a misunderstanding of the author, human error, or any of these other things. Theological contradictions are going to be trickier.
So let me just lay you out like the bare bones of this argument, because it's only going to need one verse. The rest we can talk about later. But Ezekiel, are you familiar with Ezekiel 18:20?
Not off the top of my head, but let me look it up while you.
Yeah, basically, I'm going to paraphrase it. I almost have it memorized, but basically, it's all the soul who sins shall die. The father shall not suffer for the iniquity of a child, nor a child suffer for the iniquity of a father. The righteousness of the righteous will be their own, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be their own. It seems like I have that verse and a couple others in the Old Testament that seem to indicate that like God's view of justice is you do the crime, you do the time. There's no mention of like the transfer of righteousness or the transfer of wickedness or the punishment of wickedness. But we're to believe that Jesus was able to do both of those things, because like both as the story goes, and then like I have like a few scriptures, but like Jesus's righteousness was imparted upon us, upon our belief. And he took our punishment on the cross for our sins.
That's
I can get it paraphrasing, but like that's the general story, and like it seems to be the case that like you get it.
Yeah.
So I'll just listen to your response, and then I'll probably tap out, and we'll talk later.
You're good. So that's gonna get into a lot as far as like, because so the way that I like to describe it, especially when we're engaging with the text, is we need to understand what the intention behind the passage is. Because to take Ezekiel as an example and try to compare it to the words of Paul is to do the equivalent of walking into a library and picking up, a book from the Hank the Cowdog series, one of my favorite book series growing up. If you don't know what that is, go to your local library. But Hank the Cowdog, and then reading something in there, and then going to the biology section of the library and picking up a book on dogs and reading something that contradicts, what Hank the Cowdog said, and then claiming,
I would agree.
This contradicts, so therefore everything in this library is false. Like, so we need to be careful when we're taking that. Now, as far as like Jesus taking on the iniquity and everything else, Christians are often accused of, and I forget what the terminology of, but the idea that, like you said, that we can take a punishment and put it onto an innocent party and that be satisfied. When Thomas Aquinas posits this form of justice that I personally hold to, called restorative justice. And the best way to understand it is, as a little kid, I'm sure you had the experience of playing baseball in the street and breaking a window. And then depending on, the neighbor and depending on your parents, one of three things happened. You either paid for the window out of your own allowance, you either did chores for the neighbor to restore, until he recouped the loss of the window, or your parents paid for it themselves. And in all three of those situations, what was destroyed, the window, was restored. And so what's happened is when the fall occurred, there's two things that occurred. We were damaged, and now we ourselves are causing our own damage to our relationship with our Creator. But as a whole, what we call original sin damaged the relationship as a whole with humanity. And so the gates of heaven were closed, because part of the gifts that Adam and Eve had before the fall was basically the keys to the kingdom of heaven. We no longer have those keys. And so Christ, when he died on the cross, it did several things, one of which was restore that relationship, as well as reopen the gates of heaven. Now, it's still on us as to whether or not we walk through it, but when it's talking about taking on our iniquity and cleansing us of our sins, we are guilty of our own sins, and the cross making that restorative just act to restore us in our own individual state to have that relationship with the Father, as well as reopening the gates of heaven. So it's doing multiple things in a singular act, and that's where a lot of these tensions come in, because Ezekiel's talking about for the individual, whereas, like, for example, Paul's talking about it on a universal, if that makes sense.
I mean, I'm going to be frank with you. It really doesn't make sense, but I hear that it's compelling to you. So I'll send you that argument later tonight, and we can chat about it some. And I hope you have a good live stream.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
You too.
I had to get out of here.
All right. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming up. And Pokakarumi, I did see earlier you had asked about potency in Catholicism. While most Thomists that are within Catholicism will use act and potency language, the Catholic Church has Thomists that are within Catholicism will use act and potency language. The Catholic Church has next guest. If he'll connect. Jaden. Or is it my connection? No, my connection's looking good. Oh, looks like he wasn't able to connect. But yeah, currently don't have anyone else. But once again, thank you everyone for joining and the support. Thank you for the new follows. But yeah, just, as you saw, just looking to have conversations, help provide insight, and help explain and hopefully come to better understanding as far as open dialogue. In fact, the video that I just did on the Model contingency argument was requested by Ogar, as he wanted me to basically show Theus, hey, here's how you're misusing this argument. And I enjoy doing stuff like that, is, hey, going in and helping people understand, hey, this is what the argument's trying to say, and if this is what you're trying to get to, this is how you should probably frame the argument. Because I think it helps me in my understanding, and I think it helps everyone else in their understanding as well, if we can learn to there we go. Finally connected.
Sorry about that. So basically the idea that I was having is I wanted to take the fine-tuning argument, kind of use it against the theist, right? So how I'll start it off is I'll ask the question, does God value life?
Okay.
Now, typically, if they say yes, then I'm going to say, so then why is it the case that these constants only permit are only so smallly permitting of life instead of so largely permitted of life? Because when you value something, you want more of it. So it seems to make no sense to me for God to put these constants if he values life.
So, you want to be careful with as far as like appealing to the, what's it called? The narrowness of the constants, because, one of the aspects of something being designed, and intelligently so, is not being wasteful. and I know you and I have touched on this, and I when I first brought it up, you weren't fully convinced, but think of it like, if I was to, what is the difference between a well-designed machine and a Rube Goldberg machine? Well, a Rube Goldberg machine has so many wasted components, like, or unnecessary components that are overly complicated. But the more streamlined a system is, the more intent and design was put into that system. And so the theist could argue that God could value life and could value a very particular kind of life. Not necessarily just life simplicator, but, maybe a very particular kind of life is usually the argument that they want to go for. But even if it's just life simplicator, the constants being narrow, yet life still, arising from that narrow set, they could argue is a sign of divine intention, because it's not wasteful.
Well, what I'm not understanding is what would be this wasteful material here? Because it seems to be almost intuitively to me, the two options here is that you're stuck saying that there was a limitation put on God, some kind of like logical limitation in his ability to make these constants and not waste material. We're saying that life...
It's not a wasting of material, but rather if the constants could have been anything, right? And so, or I guess if I'm understanding your concern correctly, the concern is, why is life only allowed within this narrow set of constants instead of life being allowed in every set of constants?
Under the condition that God values life.
Mm-hmm. So the thing is that even if, let's say, the constants could have been infinite, would you then say that everything would be alive?
Well, that doesn't seem so. I mean, when I'm saying life, I'm being a little bit simplistic, right? Like, I don't see why we don't see more life on. Yeah, right. So, all I'm saying is that under the God view, right, there wouldn't be no reason, or I guess limitation put on God to where he was forced into this position of making these constants so narrow.
Well, that's what.
Unless you would disagree with that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is it's not that he was restricted to it,
right?
But
so
that it's a sign.
Seems to.
It's a sign of intent and design.
But I don't think it is, right?
So,
and the reason that I don't think it is because of this idea.
So hang on, let me do this real quick. Do you know what a Rube Goldberg machine is?
No.
Okay, so that's why my analogy was failing. All right, so imagine you wanted to make a self-operating napkin to help you wipe your face.
Uh-huh.
Here we go. So...
And just to let you know ahead of time, I'm very picky on semantics. I like, if you haven't picked up on that, I will pick up on words that seem out of line for me.
All right.
Also, how do I sound? Do I sound normal?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Wanted to make sure I'm trying out these headphones that my friends letting me borrow, so wanted to make sure I sounded okay. I mean, the main issue that I was taking with the analogy is that it seems to be that when you're saying wasted material, you're saying that it could have been built a better way, and it has a lot more...
Not necessarily. So let me see if I can't zoom in on this, though, for you.
I can see just fine.
Okay, so as you can see, the way that it works, can you see my mouse? Or do I not?
Oh, no, no,
Okay.
no.
But anyway, so he picks up the spoon, that's A, which pulls the string, B, which
Mm-hmm.
causes the spoon over here at C to launch cracker D, which gets the parrot to E to move, which causes the lever to move, to dump the seed from G into H, to then pull. As you can see, it is extremely complicated to
Yeah.
get the napkin to flow. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, and so because of that, hang on. And so because of that, we wouldn't say that this is intelligently designed because of how needlessly complex it is, right? Or at least it's not well designed, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're saying, hey, why couldn't God have made the life permitting constants much broader, much, more expansive? Well, that introduces, or could introduce, needless complexity. Because
Well,
now you, instead of it being permitted to this very narrow lane, that it's streamlined and the constants are controlled, so to speak. Now the constants have a much wider range of interactions that will
mm-hmm.
that introduce needless complexity is the point. So you would need to show, like I said, it can the point and pressure point that you're attacking work, sure, but this is the possible counter to it that you need to be aware of, that you would need to demonstrate and show why.
Well, I'm not fully understanding where this would provide an issue with what I'm saying, right? Because intuitively, it seems to be that, because obviously nobody, at least like a typical theist, won't say that God isn't perfect, right? So if God is perfect, what he designs, like the universe, for an example, would be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
He values life, so I don't see how God could not be able to create the.
So that would be two things then. One, does he value life simpliciter, or did he value a very particular kind of life? Because according to the Christian, what they would want to say is that God values human life above all else.
And I would still even find issues with that then, right? Because now I could say, well, okay, if he values life so much, right, then why don't we have a much bigger planet? Why don't we have much bigger nature? That doesn't seem to add needless complexity.
Well, no, so that gets into another aspect. Well, okay, so he values a particular kind of human life. What if he values a particular amount of life as well? Because there is one theological theory, hypothesis, that, so according to the quote-unquote timeline, God created the angelic host first. And some of them stayed and some of them fell. Now, we don't know how many fell, but it has been posited by some theologians that God is creating the particular amount of human beings needed to replace the number of fallen angels. And so it's not just that he values a particular kind, but also a particular amount.
Well, I don't quite understand that then.
Well,
right? Because if we were to,
the point is, you're trying to say, well, God values X. Well, the Christian can say, and there are some that do, that get very precise on what exactly God does value, and ultimately we don't really know what God values. So appealing to life simpliciter, like just life in and of itself, well, we don't even see that, like, that God values life simpliciter even within the Christian text, because, he gives animals to humans to have dominion over. Now, it's more of a stewardship than a dictatorship, or at least that's what it's supposed to be. But he even says, I give the animals to you for food, just as I gave the plants. Well, the plants were alive. God didn't value them enough to tell us not to eat them, or at least give us a kind of living where we wouldn't have to consume them. So what does it mean for God to value life? What does it mean for God to, so as a Christian, they're already pretty precise on what it is that God values, to the point where they can say, no, God values a very particular kind of life. He values a very particular kind of outcome. And so the question is...
Well, I feel as if that's working under a weird version of value there, right? And because it seems to me that when we value something, we want more of it, right? When I say I value...
Are the angels alive?
Well, that depends on what you mean by fallen there.
No.
Right, because...
No, are the angels alive?
What do you mean by that? I don't know what you mean.
So you said God values life, but he created the angels before he created us.
Uh-huh.
So he values them to some extent.
Right.
Are they alive? The answer is no, because they don't, life is a biological thing. They exist, yes, but they're not alive. So clearly, it's not necessarily...
To be fair to myself here, I don't have a good definition for existence or life. So, those are two things that I struggle heavily to define.
What I would say then to help you in this argument is you're going to want to look at those terminologies, because if God values life, and by life you mean existence, because the angels aren't alive yet they exist, then God has permitted a existence. Because the angels aren't alive yet they exist, then God has permitted a wide constant for existence. But the other thing
throws out...
Well, because atoms exist even though they're not alive. But if what God values is existence, then the constants do permit for existence. The second thing is that...
Well...
The second thing is, as Christians, we want to be very careful in talking about what it is that God desires, because we can't argue from necessity how God achieves his goal and what God's goal is. That's actually something that's condemned. So saying oh, well, God values life. Even as a Christian, I want to be very careful saying yes or no to that. If I'm being as strict to Christian dogma as possible. Because, we can argue, the church acknowledged that we can argue from necessity that a God exists. We cannot argue from necessity how the world came to be. And that's where science comes in. Because that science tells us the particular way that God decided to create the universe. Thomas Aquinas says that we don't know why God decided to save us. We can say that it's fitting in regards to his goal, and we can make a guess on his goal due to the fact that he has saved us.
What I'm kind of missing here, right, is I'm not picking up on how value would be used here, right? Because this seems to be putting value in a very, very, very narrow version, right? I think value is a lot more general, right? I think when we say we value something, it's simply that we want more of it.
If you want to do an internal critique, you cannot take your terminology and your definition of words. You gotta use your interlocutor's definitions and their terms. So,
right. I'm fine with that, but I'm asking you why would we use value in this sense? Because that's what I'm missing here.
Yeah. So all value means is desire over another. So God desired this particular outcome over all of the other outcomes. God desired to save us from our sin over every other outcome. And he also desired a particular outcome such that the cross was the perfect way to achieve it. We don't know what that outcome is, and we don't know why the cross achieved that outcome. That's why Thomas Aquinas describes that type of perfected act, because what God does is perfect and perfectly achieves his goal. We don't know the specifics of God's goal or how that act achieves it, and we can't argue it from necessity where X leads to Y leads to Z, but we can argue how it is fitting. So the way that the Christian approaches that the God values life is not from God values life, therefore the constants are finely tuned and narrow. It's the constants are finely tuned such the point that if they didn't match this narrow area, life would not have occurred. Therefore, because it is that way, and because God acts with intention, God must have valued life. And then further on, God has specially created us beyond the rest of creation.
Right.
Therefore, he must have valued our particular kind of existence.
Well, so I have two more things that I would like to go over to you. One isn't particularly towards like theism. It's just an ethic kind of like thing. Because I get what you're saying now. I'll work on that. But so basically my idea, because I'm thinking about running this against Cody, and he's probably not going to listen to me regardless. When it comes to ethics, he just doesn't like to listen to me at all. But so it's kind of like, do you think morals are physical or material?
No.
So if that's the case, then they're abstractions. An abstraction is just something that exists non-physically or non-material. And if you're a physicalist, then you're saying right then and there that abstractions exist, one. And since morals' existence are non-physical nor material, they exist mind independently. So if I'm right there, that should lead straight towards more realism.
Is logic mind dependent or mind independent?
Mind independent.
So if there were no minds that existed, logic would still exist?
Yes.
So I would disagree. Now, so the reason why I'm going to say I disagree is because I think you're falling into the trap that a lot of people make when they think of objective and subjective. So if subjective is understood as mind dependent, then logic by definition is mind dependent, just like the laws of physics. The laws of physics
Definition.
The laws of physics.
Whoa, wait. I do want to clear up my view here. So my view when it comes to something like the laws of logic, I'm fine with saying that the use of which we use the laws of logic are mind dependent, but their existence on their own, like something like the law of identity, I think is going to exist whether our mind exists or not.
So, well, that's what I was getting at. So the laws of physics would not exist if there wasn't a mind to describe them. What actually exists is reality interacting with itself. And what the laws of physics are is our attempt at describing those interactions. So the laws of physics are mind dependent because they wouldn't exist if there wasn't a mind. But what they're describing is mind independent. It's the same for logic.
Which I'm fine with.
Yeah. So
I'm fine with that.
So the thing is that morality very well could be mind dependent because it is the mind taking agents interacting with agents and abstracting and coming to a way to try to describe those interactions. But just because it's mind dependent doesn't mean that it's arbitrary. And that is the real distinction that I think we need to focus on for any of these moral arguments before we even get into like moral realism, is because I think both the person that holds to morality as subjective and someone who holds to morality as objective,
well,
they can
I don't
that it's not arbitrary. If it's
Right.
arbitrary, that's where we get into issues.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily an issue for me to say, well, the language we use to describe something like the laws of logic or morals exist mind dependently, right? Like, obviously, if no mind, it seems to be that morals, like the use of them at least, is gone. Same thing with like the laws of logic, but I'm specifically focusing on the existence of their own, right? Do these things exist regardless of if there's a mind to describe them or not?
So that's where that's going to be hard due to the fact of, especially from my particular worldview, you would want to say that what morality is it's describing intentional action. Well, in order for there to be intentional action, there has to be a mind. Now, as far as the what you're trying to do is to get someone to acknowledge moral realism. The question that I think you ought to start from is determining whether morality is arbitrary or predictable. Because the other thing with logic that I didn't get into, like that helps further the whole case of it being mind dependent, is there's different kinds of logic. Math is also mind dependent, but not arbitrarily so, because you have different mathematical languages like binary, base 3, base 4, all the way up to base.
Well, my issue is that I don't think the simple use or the description of something makes it mind dependent or mind independent.
Well, that's why I'm saying get away from the subjective objective thing, because where that division is ironically enough very subjective. Because could one say that logic is objective? Because regardless of the mind holding it, it's the same universally across those minds. And that's why we have terms like intersubjective. But that person could be justified in saying that logic is objective. But another person is also justified in saying that it's subjective. So the real issue and the real question that needs to be established is it arbitrary? Or are there reason givers for it?
Well, I don't think anybody's really going to say that, like, at least in the context of morals, that morals are arbitrary. Right? Like, these things obviously...
There are some who do say that morals are arbitrary, but like the whole thing, like the reason why people are like, oh, it's for people who hold to divine command theory who claim that their morals are objective, and then they say, nope, they're subjective. This is why I'm saying we got to move away from the objective subjective language, at least in this type of conversation, is because technically speaking, if subjective just means mind dependent, then for the theist's position would be that everything is subjective because your existence and my existence is dependent on the mind of God. So we are subjectively existing. Yet that seems to be a crazy way to describe it, which is why the theist you'll notice usually theists don't hold to the subjective objective as the mind dependent and mind independent definition. They have a different definition for it, or a different use of it, because what they're trying to do is grasp at arbitrary or universal, essentially, or there's universal reasons behind it. Because even if my existence is dependent on God, you can use universal reasoning available to everyone to arrive at my own existence. So the real question that the atheist is trying to get at when they accuse someone who holds divine command theory about morals being subjective isn't about the subjectivity or the mind dependency, but whether or not the morals are arbitrary or if there's reasons behind it that others can arrive at. And divine command theory holds to, well, God could have said, this is fine or that's not fine, thereby making it arbitrary. So that's where you should focus on, is instead of trying to get someone to admit to objective or subjective, because of the ambiguity, especially when we're talking about rule systems, look at whether it's arbitrary or not.
Well, I think I'd have a struggle finding somebody who thinks morals are arbitrary. I mean, it's possible.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll agree
I've
with that. I haven't
spoken.
been.
I've spoken to. There are some out there, even like non-believers, who will say no, like, uh, and usually they haven't thought it through very well. I will admit, but a lot of them who do hold to morals are arbitrary. Are those that will say, "Hey, what's moral for me might be immoral for you, but what's moral for you is immoral for me, as long as you don't interfere on what I view as moral and let me live my own life and I don't bother you. Just let sleeping dogs lie," essentially. That type of language is indicative of someone who holds to a arbitrary moral system.
What? So, for my last question before I head out, I think I'm confused on what stance dependent, stance independent means, right? Because when it comes to the use of stance, right, it seems to be that there's like a couple things that we're using stance for. We're using it for like the use of something, the judgment being made on something, opinion, like a thought or something. So I that might be where I'm confused with a lot of this, right? Because I was having a discussion with Sage. I don't know if you know who Sage is, but and I couldn't quite understand why would it be an issue in me saying that the use of morals is something that is stance dependent.
So the reason why it would be stance dependent is like with the same thing, like if logic is dependent on your stance, your mind, because that's what the stance is referring to, is the position of the mind, whether it resides in the mind, comes from the mind, or whatnot. um, Stance dependent and independent does get a little bit closer to the point that I'm trying to get, as far as like the arbitrary or not. But if your goal is to communicate with someone in a language that they can understand, in order to have um, uh, that connection, you're going to want to find either you one of two things has to happen. You either use their terms to help them see your point, or you find neutral terms to help them see your point. And that's why I wouldn't use objective, subjective, stance dependent, stance independent, mind independent for this particular thing, because what's really trying to be talked about is arbitrary or not. And that's where I think you should have the focus on in this dialectic.
All right. Thank you for talking to me. I'm gonna head out. It's cool. It's so good to see you going live again.
I'm trying to be a little bit more regular, but yeah.
All right. Talk to you later, buddy.
Yeah, you have a good one. All right. Thank you, Bryn, for supporting Jaden, and thank you everyone for all the support. I see we got a couple of new followers, so welcome. I do have a Discord and a YouTube channel for everyone just joining in. My YouTube is the same as my TikTok, Catholic Thinker. I do a lot more long form content. I actually just uploaded a video Saturday going over the modal contingency argument, and kind of doing the same thing as I do here, where I'm breaking it down and going into where it works, where it fails, some common rebuttals, and how to respond to those rebuttals. And I also have a Discord. There is a link tree on my profile. Unfortunately, I don't have enough of a following or anything like that to be able to post links in my description box. But if you copy paste that link tree, it should take you to everywhere that I'm at. as well as the Discord. Or you can just shoot me a direct message, and I'll be more than happy to get the Discord out over to you. But I did get a warning because they did not like me showing the Rube Goldberg machine, and I know Ogar's live right now, and a lot of the people that are supporting me also love Ogar. But we'll give it a little bit more. Just make sure that you're 18 or older. Like the text says, I'm not looking for debates. I'm not. What that means is, as you heard me having a conversation with Jaden, I'm fine having pushback and further questions, but I'm not looking to convince you of my position, and I'm not looking for you to convince me to leave my position. This is just an open exchange of dialogue and ideas, as well as to, help work through arguments. In fact, in Ogar's Discord, that's one of the things we do, and I help Ogar out with the formation of some of his arguments. In fact, I'm curious if he's running the argument that we were talking about earlier about imperfections. But yeah, currently don't have anyone in the guest request box. And no, KTM, you were perfectly fine. Like, I've had, you'd be surprised how many people will come up here claiming to be in good faith, and then they just want to debate. What you were doing is exploring, or at least what I would call exploring. But that wasn't, I wouldn't call that a debate, or even close to it. But let's see. All right, looks like we got AR 11 minus 13.
What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Real quick, how old are you?
34.
34. All right. And what brings you up today?
Yeah, just I wanted to give you like an argument, like for naturalism, and see what you think about it.
Okay.
So we agree. Like, I'm going to do like some inductive reasoning here.
Okay.
Where we see like any given state of affairs that has a natural explanation. There's never been a moment where we had later a supernatural explanation that trumped the natural one. But we
Okay.
do see cases where supernatural explanations, some natural explanation came later and would trump over the supernatural explanation. That inductive reasoning gives us reason to believe that naturalism is more likely than theism.
So just to make sure I'm tracking, the given any state of affairs where either a new natural explanation was given or a supernatural explanation was given, the natural explanation has always won out. From there,
Well, I wanted to say like in the sense that we have
always won out. From there,
I wanted to say like in the sense that we have the supernatural explanation.
Me,
First, we do have instances.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. We do have we do have instances where the natural explanation would trump the supernatural explanation.
Yeah.
If the supernatural came first.
Well, yeah, no, that's what I was saying. It's like,
but no cases of the inverse.
Whether it was naturalism given first or supernaturalism was given first, naturalism always won out in the end.
If there's like two explanations. Yeah. If like there's like if they're conflicting explanations. Yeah.
So this gets into something that I literally was having there's another, like, I don't think he does anything on TikTok, but I do know that he's got like a Substack, and I think he's working on his PhD in theology and philosophy, but he's a fellow Catholic, and he and I disagree on this point immensely. In fact, we had a conversation about it, but namely, what you presented is why I don't think arguments using miracles work, and it's for a couple of different reasons. The first reason, and there's a couple of versions of it, but the first is I'm going to show is why arguing for miracles is fallacious. So P1, if God exists, then miracles can happen. P2, X is a miracle. Conclusion, God exists, is usually how proponents who are arguing from a miracle are trying to argue for it. But the problem is this is invalid because it's affirming the consequence. It is saying so for this particular structure, it's invalid. What you need to do is you need to prove that God exists before you can even talk about if X is a miracle or not. So before we
Right.
even get to like a supernaturalistic explanation as being a plausible explanation for an event, we can't just go to the event itself to determine it. We have to look at naturalism as a whole and supernaturalism as a whole. And this gets into the second argument. So P1, if God exists, then he created everything. P2, if God is the foundation of truth, reality, and reality is consistent, then God can't contradict himself. P3, if God cannot contradict himself, he cannot create a contradictory state. Conclusion, any act of God does not contradict his creation. So to further elaborate on what this point is trying to say is essentially any act of God, any miracle, any miraculous event you can think of is always going to work within the naturalistic system that God himself created. The way that I can describe it, or the way to imagine it, is you have a car engine, all right? And the car engine is working perfectly, and then all of a sudden something happens where it needs to be repaired. The mechanic comes in, repairs the car engine, but from the perspective of the car engine, everything is still working according to the nature of the car engine. Nothing quote unquote supernatural occurred. And so for us, it would be the same thing. While the mechanic is able to interact with the car engine in ways that the car engine can't interact with itself, he's still interacting with it in a way that is consistent with the car engine. And so when God is interacting and doing these miracles, even if we can't reproduce it, even if we can't do that action, we would still be able to find that interaction and how it is still in line with the natural world. And a lot of naturalists will say, well, if I can offer an account or an explanation within the natural worldview, not only have I explained the car engine, I've explained how the car engine exists as well. Whereas for me and my perspective, I would say, well, no, I want to be able to explain how the car engine came into existence, and just explaining the mechanics of the car engine in and of itself is not sufficient to explain that it exists. I need the mechanic or the engineer. And so that is where the God question comes in, starting from the perspective that you were starting at, which granted a lot of theists do start at, falls because it either violates this idea where in order for us to prove supernaturalism, we have to show that God interacted, and the only way for us to show that God interacted is by showing how he violated and contradicted naturalism. Well, no, I don't think that's the case, and I don't think that God would or even could do that. And so the way that I describe my particular position to people is, it's not that I'm anti-naturalism. My position is naturalism plus, as in there's just a little bit extra to the naturalism. So any explanation for any miracle, I do think, could be explained naturally if we just had the advanced scientific tools for it. But what makes it a miracle is the fact that it was intentionally acted upon by God. My favorite example to use is for the dancing sun with the children of Fatima. For me, the miracle is not that the sun danced or that there was the appearance of the sun dancing, because I don't think the sun in space actually physically moved around the way that it appeared to, but I do believe that it was some kind of a weather phenomenon that gave that appearance of the sun dancing. But that's not what makes it the miracle for me. What makes it the miracle is you had 3 children who were poor shepherd children who had no education, were able to predict a weather phenomena that we still have no idea what that phenomenon was. And they predicted the date that it would occur accurately. As a theologian once said, the miracles of the 10 plagues isn't that they couldn't happen naturally. It's that they happened when Moses said it would happen, and it stopped when Moses said it would stop. That's where the miracle comes in. The naturalist is able to explain all of the 10 plagues. And they might be able to find a naturalistic explanation as far as like when and why it stopped, but they don't have an explanation for why, if the accounts of the story are true, why Moses was able to, without that knowledge that we have, predict when it would start and when it would stop. The only way he could know that is if either God had informed him or God acted on, because he had promised Moses he would, that he would do so. So is your argument valid? Yes. Is it going to show the error that a lot of theists make when they try to argue from naturalism to support supernaturalism? Yes, absolutely. I think starting from that perspective is the wrong way to go, because they are implicitly trying to say God contradicts his creation, when that's not the case. So I do agree with you that any event that we say is a miracle will have some kind of naturalistic explanation, because God cannot contradict his creation.
Gotcha. So your argument for God, or at least some indication or evidence for him, was about like the children of Fatima, like
No,
giving like some.
I did not give any arguments for God. I was using that as an example for how I understand miracles to be.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. I see.
Yeah, I was
Do you
just
have like an argument? Like, do you have like
I've got one that I need to work on it a little bit more, but I've actually got one pinned on my profile. It is long. It has to be, unfortunately. But I do have an argument for God now, and the purpose of this platform, as you see, it's not for debates. And the way that I understand debates to be is where I try to convince you of my position and get you to leave and become Catholic, and or vice versa, where you try to convince me of your position to get me to leave Catholicism. I'm fine having a conversation and a dialogue like this, where it's like, hey, this is the argument that I tend to run against theists. You know, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah.
But as far as like my argument for God, I do have one on that's pinned on my profile, and currently what I'm trying to do on my YouTube channel is go through different arguments for God and talk about their strengths and their weaknesses. This past Saturday, I actually did it on the modal contingency argument, but I've also done it on Anselm's ontological argument.
Oh God.
Well, so I show you'll be surprised what my thoughts are. I'll just put it at that.
Yeah.
Because I agree with Aquinas in that Anselm's ontological argument does not work.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's beautiful,
Yeah.
but it doesn't work.
Have you heard of the greatest conceivable island objection?
And I go over that in that video because Anselm had a response to it because basically the error is this. Anselm's talking about the color red, just the color red in and of itself.
Right.
And then someone says, well, I have an apple that's red and this apple is round, therefore red is round.
Wow.
That's but that's the error of the island.
Yeah.
It's taking what is essential to God, turning it into an accidental property, and then taking an accident or something else that's an accidental property of the thing and applying it to the original property when that's not how that works. Like I said, I go into it a little bit more detail, but yes, I'm very familiar with the greatest conceivable island. And I go into why not only the phrase greatest conceivable is wrong, but also how the island objection doesn't work. And then I do show why that argument still doesn't work in and of itself. I also go over Pascal's wager, what it was actually intended to be used for, what Pascal intended with it, why it's actually not meant to prove God, and why people who use it to try to prove God are misusing it.
It's like a pragmatic use.
It was quite literally a cry for help from a man who was in the utter pits of despair. Like that's what it was. It was his attempt at a life preserver. It wasn't meant to be. I don't even know if he wanted it publicized. It was actually published by his students. But and then I've also done it on the it was a paper that was presented to me. A guy did it for his PhD. But I've done an argument or looked at an argument on what's called the ontological problem of evil. And I wouldn't have touched it if it wasn't for the guy's closing statement that like this argument works even against Thomists.
Whoa.
And I had to show why he was wrong on that, because Thomists reject almost any ontological argument. Just simplicator. Straight out the gate. And so they would have rejected this argument as well. And so I went through to show I did show what the strengths of it were and why I thought it was a good argument, and then showed why it doesn't work against Thomists. It wasn't a universally slamming argument. And then this past weekend, I just did it on the modal cosmological, not the modal ontological, but the modal cosmological argument. So I'm going through different arguments on my channel. I've also got some other topics mixed in there, but mostly going through different arguments for God, showing where they work, some common misconceptions about the argument, some common rebuttals, how to respond to those, basically trying to help people have a better understanding of what the content is.
I got you. So you read like a lot of arguments for and against God?
Yeah.
So you said you said the last one was a modal ontological argument or the modal cosmological argument?
Cosmological.
Yeah. So that you didn't look into the MOA, like you didn't like have like a video on that one.
So the modal ontological argument, like I said, I don't like ontological arguments simplicator, because the way that ontological arguments work is they start from a definition. So and this is going to be like super simple. P1, God is defined as that which necessarily exists.
I don't like those type of definitions.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
It's like you're defining them into existence.
But that's the problem of all ontological arguments. So if you look at like what Thomas Aquinas did, not in his 5 ways, but in like On Being in Essence, and I do have a video that touches on that on my TikTok, and it's on my Shorts tab on YouTube. But Thomas Aquinas starts not at defining God, but he starts at things exist, and then he works his way down to conclude that there must be a thing whose identity, what it is existence itself.
That's weird too. What
Well,
does that mean?
it sounds weird, but when you read, I would recommend looking and reading his book called On Being in Essence. It's like 20 pages that that you can find for free online. And so because of that, because there, he then concludes that God is existence itself. So basically what Anselm did was P1, God is existence. P2, to say no God is to say existence does not exist, which is a contradiction. So P3, this leads to a contradiction. Conclusion, God must exist. Thomas Aquinas is going to say, this is the very thing in contention. God is existence. That's the very thing we're trying to figure out. This is the very thing in contention. God is existence. That's the very thing we're trying to figure out. All right, I think I'm back.
You're back?
Yep.
Okay.
But yeah, so this is the conclusion that, or this is what's being contested, so it needs to be the conclusion of an argument.
Right.
But because the conclusion is also identifying the nature of a thing, and ontological arguments start with the nature or definition of a thing.
Right.
It then becomes circular.
It is, yeah.
Not unjustly so. Like, it is doing exactly what an ontological argument is supposed to do, but it just, it doesn't work for God, unfortunately. Because the very nature of God is that which is being contested.
Right.
So that's why ontological arguments don't work. And so the Model ontological argument starts with God is a necessary being.
Right.
But that's the very thing we're trying to establish.
I agree.
So, there's different problems with the Model ontological argument, but I think the best ontological argument ever presented is Anselm's, just personally.
All right. Have you looked into like Gödel's incompleteness theorem and stuff like that, or not incompleteness theorem, proof of God rather?
Not his proof of God, but in fact that recently came across my feed at one point. I've heard of his incompleteness theorem, and definitely fascinating how he was able to do that.
Yeah, that one's just, it's talking about like some bottoming out.
Yeah, well, I also use that to show why tag is wrong. If there are things that unprovably true things that we know are true, then the very premise of tag that we can't know things until we know God because it needs to be grounded in God.
Yeah.
Well, Gödel's incompleteness theorem kind of throws that out the water.
Yeah, it chucks it out. Yeah, that does. Yeah. You also have like the proper criterion as well.
But yeah, that is something that I'm kind of working on. I am working on my own argument for God. Like I said, it's the one that's pinned on my TikTok profile. And
is it a deductive argument or abductive or inductive or?
I'm not sure. But I presented it to several people. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Unapologetic crew, Dr. Blitz and Justin Deconstruction Zone.
I do. Yeah.
But I presented it to
You should present it to Ian.
Yeah. Well, so I tried to, but unfortunately the day that I presented it, Ian had to leave early that particular day.
Yeah. Because he would be the one to, out of the three, he's the one to like, he actually like.
Oh, I mean,
that's his
I've talked to
niche.
I've talked to them before on on different arguments and things like that. But the point that I was getting at is like when I presented it to Justin and Dr. Blitz at the same time during their unapologetic stream. Even Dr. Blitz was like, yeah, no, like this is valid, like it follows, but the concern he had was a potentially a possibility of equivocation. He doesn't think that I was actually equivocating, but he wasn't sure if I wasn't. So he wanted me to be careful with that. And then my argument relied on priority monism not being true, or at least the way I had it formatted at that particular time. I think I can restructure it where priority monism isn't an issue, whether it's true or not. And priority monism is, a particular metaphysical worldview that I wasn't aware of as I was forming this particular argument. But they were saying that, like, yeah, no, like this argument follows. It's at least valid, but because of these issues, we're not sure if it's sound.
Gotcha. I see. Yeah. So you have a valid argument. It's just whether or not one of the premises are true. Okay. Yeah. So there's like a premise-based argument.
Yeah.
So how many premises are there?
So it's technically 4 premises, but I do give justifications for each premise, and each justification ranges between 4 to 8 premises for the justification.
Oof.
Yeah, so it's, like I said, it's a long argument, but each step is required. If one already accepts the conclusion, like the very first premise / conclusion is there was never nothing, or something always existed. If someone accepts that, then I just move on to the next spot. But if they don't accept something always existed, then I have the justifications for that listed out.
Do you like combat infinite regress at all, or
no? So I actually do have a video on infinite regress. So there's 2 kinds, just like how an argument can be spiral, which is almost circular, but it's not vicious circularity. Something can be infinite or regress infinitely and it not be a vicious regress. I think one of the easiest examples of a vicious regress is there's a particular understanding or definition of knowledge where in order to have knowledge, you need to know that you know X. All right. But so I know X, and I know that I know X. But here's another no, so that means I need to know that I know that I know X. Oh no, yeah. There's another one. So that's a vicious regress. Now, what is often called a vicious regress, or infinite regress, I should say, not vicious. What is often called an infinite regress in modern language nowadays is something like the number line, or something like an infinite eternal past.
I had a phone call. What was the last thing you said?
An infinite eternal past, where every moment of time has a moment before it. And there's never a first moment. And so from there...
You said that's vicious or virtuous?
Well, no, that's an example of a infinite regress. Not necessarily a vicious one.
Yeah.
Just an infinite regress.
Gotcha.
All right?
Right.
Now, Thomas Aquinas, who is very famous for saying you can't have an infinite regress. But when he was writing...
Isn't he talking about a per se causing chain?
Exactly. So he's talking about what we nowadays call a vicious infinite regress. The know that you know. Know that you know that you know that you know. Like that. He's talking about that type of infinite regress.
Yeah, he's talking about like a per se causal chain where you can't have like an infinite amount of chandeliers.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
So
yeah.
He also said it is impossible to show through natural reason whether the universe had a finite beginning or not. In other words, we don't know if time is infinite or not. And we cannot
Right.
know. And the only reason why I, as a Catholic, can claim knowledge is because I have faith that God, who revealed that time is finite, was telling the truth. So it's a matter of faith for me that time is finite. So when Thomas Aquinas is formatting his arguments, he carefully did it to show that whether time was finite or whether time was infinite, you still need a God in either situation. So you're almost bypassing that issue, so to speak.
Okay, so you're just saying that God can exist regardless of
If there's an
infinite
infinite
past.
past or not, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, okay, but like you're saying that you don't believe that infinite regress is problematic then.
Not the way that it's used nowadays. So if we're talking about like an infinite past, that's not problematic to any argument that I've presented or try to present for God. But a vicious infinite regress, like the I know that I know that I know type thing, that is a different story altogether.
What about like infinite regressive creators? Do you think that's also a problem or no?
Well, so then so what ends up happening there is that's the same thing as the I know that I know that I know.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Yeah.
Yeah, like so that's where like either and so this is where, and the way that I'm trying to approach it is, let us first establish that a necessary thing exists, or something that I used independent. An independent thing exists. Either that is the universe or something other than the universe, even if the universe is infinite.
Right.
That very well could be the independent thing. But now let's look into what enables a thing to be independent. And that's the approach that I'm taking in my argument, is instead of trying to argue that the universe, instead of basically assuming that the universe can't be independent, which is what I think a lot of people tend to do, I'm trying to say, all right, we've established that we need something independent. Great. Let's now explore what enables a thing to be independent, and then we will see if that matches the universe. If it does, great, the universe is independent. If it doesn't, that tells us that something else other than the universe is independent.
I see. And you go over that in your argument that there's something that enables the independence of the universe.
Yeah.
If something enables, it may not be like causally independent, or rather, you're saying that there's some causal independence, but there's still some metaphysical dependency.
I call it grounding.
Yeah. That's grounding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing to me. Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, that's the way that in my understanding that the modern vernacular uses the terms that Thomas Aquinas was using are now better understood as grounding. So when Thomas Aquinas is talking about like the first cause, he's not talking about scientific, temporally bound cause and effect. He's talking about explanatory or reason giving, which is understood as grounding in my understanding, because something can be grounded through a temporal chain of cause and effects, but something can also be grounded in something that isn't temporally based.
Yeah. Like a metaphysical grounding or a metaphysical dependency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we just call grounding. Yeah, I get that. Okay, so your argument deals with that. Okay, got it. And then you discuss why you would need a ground. Okay, yeah. You obviously discuss why you need a grounding then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that covers that.
Yeah,
All
well,
right. Yeah.
because it comes from the definition of dependent and independent. If something is dependent, that means there is something that it's dependent on, and we call that type of relationship a grounding. Um,
Yeah.
and then something that is independent is something that isn't dependent on anything else, therefore has no grounding on anything else.
I see. So you go from okay, the universe could be the independent, but like you're talking about some causal independence, and then you switch from that to some metaphysical
Nope,
dependence.
I stay in the metaphysical dependency entirely.
No, but I'm saying like when you say the universe is independent, you're saying what enables the independence,
So what
right?
I,
But what you mean by
it's
that independence?
well, it's going to be easier if you look at it, but basically the way the argument goes is first I establish that something had to always exist. And then
Right,
I establish that there has to be at least one independent thing.
right,
Then I look into what the nature of this independent thing is.
right.
Then I establish that because this independent thing requires its identity to be existence, which is not the same as the universe, therefore it's something else. So I'm calling this thing whose identity is existence, I'm calling it God. Then from there, I also establish that there can only be one thing whose identity is its existence.
That's okay. So you just all right. So you're defining some identity to be exist. You said that's Aquinas that does that too,
No,
right?
no, well, no. So Anselm uh, just starts from that. Like he doesn't even provide the justification for it.
Oh,
So
no, I'm not talking
he,
about that. I'm talking about Aquinas.
yeah,
Aquinas
yeah,
said something about the
yeah.
on being in essence.
Yep.
He said something.
So, well, the thing is
You think
that
that
in Catholicism, especially classical theism, which you can find traditions in even Islamic and Jewish tradition, um, we believe that God is pure existence. And the support for this is found in the name of God in Exodus, where God reveals his identity as I am that I am, or the verb to be, existence. So we believe that God is pure existence. And so Thomas Aquinas provides justification for that definition, for that position. And what I'm trying to do is because he was operating within an Aristotelian framework, and a lot of people nowadays have moved away from that, I'm trying
outdated? Yeah.
to update the argument in
Right.
more modern vernacular, modern cosmology philosophy, in a way
Right.
that is understandable to others. Uh, that's basically what I'm working on, essentially.
Have you got around the fact that like some quantum mechanics work off of like causation from nothing? Or it
My
could be the
my argument
case
isn't concerned with that again because it's concerned about grounding, not causality.
causation.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
because even though there isn't a cause for the quantum fluctuations, the quantum
Right.
fluctuations are still dependent on the wave function. They're still dependent on the space-time manifold existing, because if the space-time manifold didn't exist, then there's no fluctuations of the manifold to occur.
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so those would still count as a dependent thing, even if they are an uncaused thing.
I see. You're saying that yeah, there's some like ontology. There's a metaphysical grounding or
Mm-hmm.
metaphysical. Yeah, yeah. I see. So that takes care of that. I'm trying to think of like what other things within the argument needs to be addressed. I just have to look at it, I
Well, what
guess.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
do, because remember, like I said, Thomas Aquinas, the big thing at Thomas Aquinas' time, like right now we've got quantum mechanics as like a big thing. But the big thing during the time of Thomas Aquinas was whether or not the universe was eternal in the sense that it had an infinite past, had no beginning. Because the argument was that if the universe never had a beginning, then it doesn't require a cause. It doesn't require a creator. Therefore,
Right.
no God. And so Thomas
Yeah.
Aquinas formatted his arguments such that it shows that God is required whether the universe had a beginning or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to do something similar where it doesn't matter what quantum mechanics says about the nature of causality. It doesn't matter whether priority monism is true or not. God is still
Right.
required. So I'm calling this approach the worldview independent argument for God, because I'm trying to make an argument that works regardless of your metaphysical preconceptions.
I wish that I knew. Like, I gotta look at it because I want to know whether or not it's like a deductive argument or abductive.
I mean, it's out there for like I said, for you to look at it. I do need to work on it. But like I said, look into Thomas Aquinas's book On Being in Essence. It's like I said,
Yeah.
the PDF that
Yeah.
I like to use is like 20 pages, but even then, like each page, half of it is like commentary. So it's a very quick read,
Nice.
and I've got a brief summary of it on my TikTok, and I've also got, like I said, my argument on there as well.
Do you consider yourself a Thomist, like a scholastic, or?
Yeah. So I wouldn't. I consider myself a student of the Thomistic method. Do I hold to a lot of things that Thomas Aquinas said? Yes, absolutely. But I don't limit myself to him. And there's a lot of Thomists out there who limit themselves to Thomas Aquinas. Like if Thomas Aquinas didn't say it, they don't pull it into their worldview.
Oh yeah.
But Thomas Aquinas didn't work like that. He pulled from Aristotle, St. Augustine, Moses
He
Maimonides, who
did.
is a
Yeah.
Jewish rabbi, Avicenna and Averroes, Islamic philosophers.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Like he
He
pulled
did.
from people of
Hmm.
all different traditions and background to help incorporate them into his worldview. Sometimes he agreed with his side and
Even
disagreed.
Plato.
Yep. And
Yeah.
sometimes he
Yeah.
agreed with his fellow Catholics and disagreed with the non-Catholics, and sometimes he agreed with the non-Catholics and disagreed with the Catholics, because he was concerned and obsessed with finding truth wherever it may reside. And
You
that's
think there's
what
something that he gets? Is there something that conflicts with Catholicism? Do you think between him and you
um
think that he learns perfectly with
it
Catholicism?
it it goes really, really, really closely with Catholicism. And in the areas where like I disagree with them are areas that Catholicism itself doesn't cover. Um, and like for example, the rule of spousal corporal punishment for infidelity. I disagree with him on that, but the church herself also hasn't made any statement about that particular position. Um, but that was him operating within his understanding at the time. And so there are things that I do disagree with him, but I also think he got a lot of things right, but I'm also not going to limit myself only to him.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Gotcha. What about Augustine? Do you disagree with a lot of stuff Augustine said? I'm assuming that you disagree with like irresistible grace and
No, that
his.
irresistible grace is Catholic dogma. Um,
Is it?
yeah.
Oh shit! I don't know.
It so what irresist so the thing about like irresistible, so you have sufficient and efficacious grace. So sufficient
Mm.
grace everyone has, even the non-believer. But all sufficient grace is it's the God giving you the ability to open yourself to be receptive to the efficacious grace, which is the irrefutable grace, the where when you receive it, it compels you to act. But it's what it is it's like, think of it like this: you have a soldier who wants to go to fight to defend his family, but he is terrified of dying, but he knows that he needs to defend his family and wants to go and fight to defend his family. He doesn't want to be terrified, but his human
Yeah.
nature is compelling him to be terrified. So the efficacious grace would be the equivalent of God helping him overcome his fear, so that way then he can go and fight. It compels him to fight. It's what he wants. So it's not overriding free will, but it's basically
Yeah.
the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. It is God helping us overcome the flesh to do what the spirit wants.
Got it. Okay, so you agree with that? Do you agree with wow, what is it called? There's like two-way great. There's two-way of receiving. Like there's like a dang. I'm trying to think of the word. It's mono. It's dang. What is it? Monergism. Yeah, monergism. Do you agree with monergism?
Modernism, the modernist heresy.
Monergism. Monergism.
Uh,
Yeah, it's yeah. If you think it's heresy, then
well, no. So,
obviously.
like, there's the modernist heresy, but there's also the if what you're referring to is the way that we receive grace, because the way I've always heard this description is in regards to predestination, where God knows whether we accept His grace or not, and acting on that knowledge, He then predestines us to salvation, because He knows if we accept it or not.
Yeah, I'm talking about like uh what's it called, salvation, right? Where
Mhm.
it's either two-way salvation where you choose and God chooses, and it's like a synergism,
Mhm.
versus like monergism. Yeah, Alacrity is saying it. Monergism is saying that only God is responsible for salvation,
Uh,
and synergism is saying there's a two-way
yeah,
salvation.
I haven't heard. So I haven't heard the terminology, and I don't know if what I'm about to describe fits one or the other. But the way that I understand it is salvation only comes from God. There
Oh,
is
so you're a monergist.
hold on. There is nothing we can do to merit or earn salvation.
Well,
But
that's faith-based, you're saying, yeah.
well, it's not even like faith based, because faith is the response to it, which is the key word. It does require a response and cooperation on our part. So it is synergistic in that sense, because it's like God can't force the salvation onto us. The analogy I like to use is you're stuck in a well, someone tosses a rope down to you. You are
Yeah.
saved the moment that rope has been tossed down, but it still requires you to grab onto it to allow yourself to be lifted out. So you're
So, so it is
still
synergism, yeah. So it is synergism.
but like I said, but we're not the source of it. So when you were
No,
talking
no,
about
no. It's
like,
not saying that you're the source.
well,
We're
that
saying that salvation works on the principle that you have to respond to the grace. You have to respond to the. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. What you're saying is exactly it.
okay,
That's synergism.
yeah, because the way you
Yeah.
described it earlier, you had it sounded like there was an implication that it comes from us as well.
No, no, no. Only that there's like a two-way street. You have to accept it as well.
Mm-hmm.
When monergists believe that God alone is what saves.
Sounds almost Calvinistic.
Yeah, it is Calvinist. It is. It's exactly it. They believe in like all of that. So they believe like there's an elect,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no way to. You can't, if you're elected. That's it. You can't.
Yep.
You can't stray away from God, and you're automatically saved
Well,
from the elect.
yeah, I mean, like if you're predestined, even in the Catholic faith, if you're predestined, then yes, you're going to be in heaven, but it's not contrary to your will, and it's not contrary to your cooperation. It is because of and in response to your cooperation.
Yeah, that's the difference. Yeah.
Anything else?
I don't know. I think I hit like a bunch of points here. I don't know. You want to talk about anything? I don't know what else to talk about.
I'm mostly up here, like I said, just to answer questions and help people like strengthen their arguments. But I've been on for almost 2 hours, and I try to do it for an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I think I'm gonna call it, unless there's something you got a burning question or something like that.
I think I'm out of questions now, man.
All right.
All right, man.
Appreciate
Okay, thank you for the talk.
Absolutely.
Cool.
You have a good one.
Oh, you too. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for all of the support. I see we got a couple of new followers. Thank you, Talino, for sending AR the flowers. Any and all support is definitely greatly appreciated. Like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and finish it up. I know that Ogar is live, so everyone head over to Ogar Debates. And if you want more of this content, just shoot me a follow. I've also got stuff on YouTube, and I've got a Discord. Shoot me a DM, and I'll be more than happy to get the information out over to you. But thank you everyone for coming. And like I said, go to Ogar Debates and tell them that Catholic Thinker sent you. Y'all have a good one.